Canadian journalists embarrassingly fawn over a fringe conspiracy theorists. The media runs with its own made-up narrative about why the Conservatives lost the last election. And CTV finally wants to show a different side of the Conservative Party. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, welcome to the program. Due to popular demand, we're going to be coming to you twice a week now. We're going to do a midweek episode as well as the typical Friday podcast, and we're going to expand a little bit more beyond just media criticism. We're going to look into some of the day-to-day issues in the country and examine some of the broader issues behind being a conservative in Canada. So we're excited about the changes. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump right into the news today. So Green Party leader Elizabeth May is finally resigning. She's been party leader for 13 years, since 2006, and she really doesn't have a lot to show for it. Her party has sort of been stuck in the irrelevant fringe stage. This was supposed to be the big year, and even with all the talk about climate change, climate emergency, we had Greta Thunberg making a cross-Canada tour, basically doing a pitch for fringe green parties like that Elizabeth May runs. She was still unable to break through electorally, so she's rightfully stepping down. Now, the mainstream media are trying to paint her into some kind of a rock star, life-changing politician, someone who led a serious conversation in public life. Here we have the Huffington Post showing Elizabeth May's 5 most iconic moments as Green Party leader. City News over there is saying that Elizabeth May has a lot to be proud of. Well, True North has a little bit of a different institutional memory when it comes to Elizabeth May. She's basically just a fringe conspiracy theorist. She's had a lot of very crazy views that she puts out there. She's pretty media savvy, pretty good at inserting herself into the story. And, that's why so many media people love her, why journalists love her, because she made it easy for them. And of course, also because she occupies a fringe far left position, which is where a lot of journalists in this country also occupy in terms of their worldview and their thinking. So True North has compiled a different list, not the 5 most iconic memories of Elizabeth May, but more than 5 instances of her just being a pure fringe lunatic. So let's see. Let's start off. Elizabeth May said she's waging a war on Wi-Fi. She said that wireless internet is related to the disappearance of pollinating insects. She's tweeted about chemtrails. She compared Stephen Harper's climate change position to, quote, appeasement of the Nazis, unquote. She once presented a 9/11 conspiracy theory petition in the House of Commons. She falsely claimed that Canadian grocery stores import eggs from China on a routine basis, which is untrue.
Right now, do you know we actually have grocery stores in Canada that are importing eggs from China on a routine basis? All of the garlic in major grocery store chains in Canada comes from China.
This one was particularly annoying to me, or just kind of gross. She got into a spat with Jason Kenney, now Premier of Alberta, back when Jason Kenney was a Minister of Immigration. Kenney was working with some people on a monument that they unveiled for the victims of communism. As you know, communism is the deadliest ideology in world history, led to the death of hundreds of millions of people. And so, they were building up a monument, and Elizabeth May decides to make light of it. So she tweets, no mention of a monument for the victims of capitalism. Oh, zing. Well, Jason Kenney rightly responded, perhaps that's because no one was shot in the back while risking their lives to flee eastward over the Iron Curtain. Or perhaps it's because free societies don't murder tens of millions in gulags and planned famines, etc. So, for Elizabeth May to make light about something as gruesome as the millions and millions of victims who were murdered by communist regimes is pretty gross. And to compare it to capitalism, which is essentially just free markets and human liberty. Those are sort of night and day now. Obviously, there's people who have suffered in the world despite capitalism. Capitalism doesn't just, create like a silver bullet to create a good life for people. There's been people who have suffered under capitalism too, but not anywhere to the same extent. And essentially, what capitalism is just freedom. And so to say that somehow to equate communist regimes with freedom and Canadian freedom is just really sickening. But that's the kind of person that Elizabeth May is. She once claimed that the United States recruited Osama bin Laden in order to create Al-Qaeda. As you recall, she was very intoxicated at a parliamentary press gallery dinner. And while very drunk, this is what she had to say. Let's play the clip.
Do you guys remember this theme song? Welcome back. Who knew Cotter was spelled K-H-A-D-R? Welcome back, Omar Cotter. It matters to say it. Welcome back, Omar Cotter. You're home.
So, sure, she was sort of joking around, but then she kind of gets into it that she believes that Omar Cotter is this sort of upstanding young man, despite the fact that he was a terrorist as part of Al-Qaeda and admitted to killing an American soldier. So, Elizabeth May, not exactly a person that you want to really be celebrating. And again, this just shows the severe left-wing bias of the mainstream media. If there was a fringe right-wing candidate that had similar conspiracy views, that had a long history of just saying outright crazy things, making light of the murder of millions of people, making light and making conspiracies about terrorists who kill Canadian and American citizens. I don't think that person would be given such a rosy send-off if they were to retire. So again, the extreme bias, and not just the fact that Elizabeth May was a crazy person. She was objectively bad at her job. Despite, the huge momentum that the Green Party could have had, she wasn't able to capitalize on it. She wasn't able to actually, gain some segment of support enough to elect some MPs. I always personally would have liked to see the Green Party take on more of a free market bend and sort of be another party, not necessarily just another left-wing fringe party, but a party that promoted free market ideas where conservatives could park their vote if they were just unhappy with the direction of the current Conservative Party. But instead, the Greens toil off in obscurity because they stick with that hard left agenda. Really, there's not a lot of difference between them, the NDP, and the Liberals. There's a lot to offer over there. Okay, let's move on. I want to talk a little bit. This is one of my pet peeves, and it happens after every election. I remember vividly it happening after the 2015 election. The mainstream media decided that the reason that Stephen Harper lost was because the Conservatives were Islamophobic. They decided that you could boil the entire campaign down to a few moments, the awkward press conference where they announced the barbaric cultural practices hotline, and a couple other instances like that. And the media is just like a simplistic idea. This is why the Conservatives lost, because of this one policy. And then they kind of like declare it as fact, and then move forward as if the Conservatives now have to go back and do soul searching about why they hate Muslims or why they're so Islamophobic. Well, they're doing it again with this election. So throughout the entire campaign, the media fixated and were obsessed with the idea that Andrew Scheer is personally pro-life and that 13 years ago he made comments that opposed same-sex marriage. So they jumped on these two facts and they repeated them throughout the campaign over and over and over again. They ran stories, they did investigations, they did everything they could to keep those two stories top of mind. Now, anyone who watches a campaign, and as most conservatives know, Andrew Scheer didn't proactively volunteer this information. He wasn't the one that was leading with this stuff. That wasn't part of his campaign, wasn't part of his platform. It wasn't part of what the Conservative Party of Canada were presenting to Canadians, presenting to the electorate. It was just the mainstream media's own fixation. And so because the media fixated on it so much, they determined that was the reason that Andrew Scheer lost, that Andrew Scheer actually lost the election, not because they ran a bad campaign in Quebec, not because they failed to do the right kind of outreach in the GTA, or they failed to come up with a meaningful platform and policies that they could really capture the imagination of Canadians. No. The mainstream media decided that it was because of the stories that the mainstream media themselves invented and pushed on Canadians throughout the entire campaign. And so now we're doing this shtick. Here you see it. Let's go through them. CTV. Scheer's position on same-sex marriage could be fatal, conservative insiders say. This is a favorite trick of the mainstream media, is that they always find an expert or an insider to just say what that journalist believes. So this is presented as news, not opinion. This isn't the opinion of the journalist that's writing the story. It is news, because instead of them having their own quote, that Scheer's position on same-sex marriage could be fatal, they just find some insider, usually anonymous, some anonymous insider to say exactly what they think, and that's the headline. So Scheer's position could be fatal, says CTV. CBC, Scheer's messaging on abortion cost him votes on both sides of the debate, says observers. Oh, that's a new one. So, add observers to the list of experts and insiders. Global News says Scheer's TVA French debate performance was a death blow for Tories in Quebec, says a former candidate. And here's another one. Find a guy that lost his seat and then get him to agree with the mainstream media and the narrative, and that's why they lost. So this article goes on to say that it was Scheer's inability to defend himself on these social issues that became obvious to Quebec voters during the debate, and that's why he lost. And similarly, here is the Hill Times, which is kind of the insider newspaper in Ottawa for sort of people working in Ottawa in the government. Knives out to dump Conservative leader, but Scheer's team should reach out to supporters urgently to survive April leadership review, says Conservatives. So the similar kind of theme that they're all getting at, which is basically that the reason that Scheer lost is because of this whole commotion made by the mainstream media over Andrew Scheer's views. That's not what he wanted to run the election on. Those are not the issues that he wanted to be talking about. In fact, these are issues that are well in the past, in the background. These issues were debated in Canada decades ago, and now, for whatever reason, the media wants to talk about them again. No one else really does, including a lot of Conservatives that you'll find now talking to the media saying, the Conservatives must have screwed up because we shouldn't have been running the election on these controversial issues. Well, I don't think anyone wanted to other than the media. So the media, again, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They talk about an issue, and then that issue they blame for the fall of the Conservatives, and then they talk about it again. So that's how mainstream media narratives work in a nutshell. And, it's kind of disappointing because I think that if Canadians just stopped tuning into the media in the same way that I think many do in the United States, who just completely ignore it, these issues wouldn't be the ones dictating the election as they seem to be now. A lot of times it's because Conservatives kind of agree reluctantly at the end. And so you see a whole bunch of Conservatives now on TV just saying, yeah, we really shouldn't have been talking about those issues, and we need a more modern Conservative to take us into the next election. Again, just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I said this in an interview with my colleague Andrew Lawton. I think that Andrew Scheer really needs to fight back. If he wants to maintain his leadership of the Conservative Party, if he wants to do another shot in an election, he has to learn how to fight back against the mainstream media. He has to call them out on their nonsense. If they're doing an interview and they're being unfair, he needs to look that journalist into the eye and call them out and tell them what they're doing is unfair, and point to the fact that they would never do this to the Liberal leader. They'd never do this to the NDP leader, that they only do it to Conservatives. And you can see that's happening right now. Justin Trudeau lost a huge segment of the vote. He lost over 1 million votes from the last election. He lost a bunch of seats. He's no longer majority position. No one's talking about ousting him as leader. The NDP were decimated. They lost all their seats but one in Quebec. They're down to just, less than 24 seats in the House of Commons. No one's calling for Jagmeet Singh to resign. So again, this is just a total double standard. The Conservatives gained seats. The Conservatives gained the popular vote. The Conservatives gained representation in every region. And yet it's Andrew Scheer that's being called to resign. One final thing I want to talk about. This is a CTV interview. And it's funny how this happens, that now that the election is over, CTV finds a very sympathetic Conservative candidate and talks about a whole bunch of things that they never bothered to report during the election. So let's play part of this clip.
As a member of the LGBTQ2 community, you defended Conservative leader Andrew Scheer for not being direct or forthcoming early in the campaign on issues like same-sex marriage and abortion. Some people in your party are blaming Mr. Scheer that they did not win this election.
We made progress. We gained in our seat count, and I think, like I said, we form a national opposition in the sense that we have representation from coast to coast. I've always been a supporter, obviously, of LGBTQ rights, and I will be in the House of Commons. And I think the more parties that have more diversity that can advocate for that, that. It's part of who I am, and I always will be. And I think when I talk to party members and I talk to new caucus colleagues, I think we need to work on how we make ourselves a modern Conservative party.
So it's funny that during the election, all we heard was that the Conservatives are bigots, the Conservatives are homophobic. Andrew Scheer obviously has a problem with same-sex marriage and with gay people. And then suddenly, as soon as the election's over, the media find a Conservative MP who was just elected in Ontario who has a very different message and has a very different outlook. It actually makes it seem like the Conservatives are pretty well-rounded, pretty representative, pretty much a big tent party that welcome people of all backgrounds and all orientations. And yet we only see this side of the Conservative Party after the election, and because that Conservative MP is willing to talk about the issues that the mainstream media want to talk about, willing to indulge them on this theory that Andrew Scheer made a huge mistake and is secretly a homophobe. Well, doesn't this candidate and this MP's very presence show the opposite? Why would a person who's part of the LGBT community join the Conservative Party and run as a Conservative and become a Conservative MP if they really were as awful and as horrible as the mainstream media make it out to be? And again, this is just media bias in a nutshell, because obviously the Conservatives are not the people who get painted as in the media. And this is sort of like, the CTV letting its mask slip, saying, oh, look, we found this one person who doesn't fit our mold of what an evil, mean, scary Conservative is. Well, maybe if you had interviewed folks like this during the campaign, maybe if you had told the other side of the story, people wouldn't have had those impressions in the first place. And again, this is the problem with our media in Canada. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will be back with another episode on Friday. So until then, bye-bye.